Okay, I want to welcome everyone to this month's meeting of the Nashville Microsoft Azure User Group. I hope you guys can see my screen. Is that okay? Can you see it?
I see Scott now.
Oh, you don't see my presentation?
It's there.
No, it's there.
It's up? Okay. All right, we'll get started. This is our group logo. This is a description of our mission. I can shorten it very definitely and say that we're all about Azure. Education, forum, networking, whatever, whatever we feel like doing at a meeting. We used to meet normally in normal times, whatever normal is. We used to meet every third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock at Microsoft. We used to have food and networking at 6, and then at 6:30 we used to start the main presentation. Currently, as you can tell, we're meeting up online only. We have, I haven't checked lately, but I know, excuse me, I know that we have over 1,500 registered members and we're growing all the time. But we could always use more members. So if you know someone that ought to be a member of the group, have them join. Have them get in touch. We're in Meetup. They can find us. Also, we want to know what topics they're interested in, because we can, we got a pretty, especially now with online meetings, we can go pretty broad in terms of finding speakers. In fact, I've got one speaker who wants to do a presentation for us from the UK. Problem there is we'd have to have the meeting at noon our time. So, but if you got topic ideas, let us know. This is our board of directors. I'm the founder and the president. I founded the group back in 2013 when we had only 4 members. Now we got, like I say, now we've got over 1,500. I'm a cloud solution architect with Red App, the consulting firm here in Nashville. Well, here in the United States, I should say, because they're all over the place. Roger Dahlman is a co-founder and vice president of the group. He's an enterprise architect over at Deloitte here in Nashville. A lot of you probably know Tim Warner. Tim Warner is pretty well known. He's a Microsoft Azure MVP, and he works for Pluralsight. He's done most of the the Pluralsight courses. So he's our on the board as well. Ukela Alred is our director of academic outreach. She works with colleges, attracting people from the colleges, people from the Nashville Software School, and so forth to our meetings. Let's see, Matthew Puckett is our, now he's a global black belt solution architect, I think, with Microsoft. He's here in Nashville. He was the original meeting sponsor, and he's stuck with the group, since we started. I guess his title is Microsoft Principal National Cloud Solution Architect. And Vaco has been our refreshment sponsor since 2013. So we've been pretty lucky not to have to scrounge around for pizza, like I used to have to do up in the Northeast when I ran user groups up there. So he works for Vaco. He's our refreshment sponsor. Speaking of sponsors, these are our sponsors. Microsoft, when we meet at Microsoft, they were our permanent meeting sponsor. Vaco's our refreshment sponsor, like I mentioned. Tim is our the sponsor for this Teams channel that we're using tonight. So this is actually Teams, Tim's Teams. Okay. And Red App gives me time to work on the group on their time, which I appreciate. So these are our sponsors. We are trying to institute a sponsorship program. Roger Dahlman is going to set up a program where if a company wants to give us a $25 gift certificate or something or some swag to raffle off or something, we'll take that in exchange for giving them a few minutes to talk about their company. We were much more fired up on this when we were meeting in person, but we could still probably do it. So if you do have any ideas, get in touch with Roger Dahlman at dahlman.net. Her address is on the bottom. We got a bunch of meetings already scheduled. Already scheduled for the future. Steve Alterman, who's a Microsoft Cloud Solution Architect, is going to do a talk on PaaS next month. Platform as a Service. We've got a talk coming up on September 17th on Azure Network Architecture. I won't try to pronounce Vibhav's name just yet. I'll have to ask him how I pronounce it. He's a platform architect with Qt. And John Bowker is a CISO, a computer information security officer at End Contracts, and he's going to talk about securing Azure subscriptions. So that's what's coming up. Tonight, the topic is what is DevSecOps and why should you care? And I could read this to you, but I think what I'll do is just turn the floor over to Jeffrey, and I'll go on mute and watch to see if people show up in the lobby. Jeffrey, why don't you take it away?
All right, let me share my Prezzo, and then I'll start it. All right. So, good evening. Thanks to Azure the Azure Meetup Group and William for allowing HealthStream to come and present. And especially since it's a small group, I've presented a lot in the past, but especially since it's a small group, I want to keep it as interactive as possible. So I'll take some natural pauses, and Bill and I spoke, and if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. So DevSecOps is kind of the topic that we'll talk about. Got a real quick agenda. Talk about why we're here, while we're talking about DevSecOps, more than kind of just the punchline. I'll give you a little bit of my background and experience. And then weren't really sure who was going to be there, whether they're in a DevOps shop or whether you're just starting that journey. So I generalize this as much as possible. We're going to talk about some tools and technologies as well. All right, so why are you listening to me about this? What do I know about DevSecOps? So I'm going to give you a little bit about my background. Currently the AVP of Information Security for HealthStream, Head of Security. HealthStream, if you're not familiar with us, we are 28 years old, headquartered downtown, but now, just like the rest of the world, we are distributed around the globe. And we've been in business, like I said, 28 years, and we are a software as a service company. So just about every healthcare provider does business with us. We have about 5 million subscribers, give or take. I've been in IT a long time, but about 25 years. Makes me sound old. I feel old. 15 of those years have been focused on all kind of aspects of risk and security. I'm a member of the Tennessee Army National Guard Cyber Protection Team. I've been in the service for 16 years now. That's going to come into play. And my background is primarily infrastructure and security. So why am I up here talking about DevSecOps? Well, I jokingly say I was forced to learn it. The way that and by the way, I just finished a deployment that's important to this story. I got back March 7th. I was gone for a year and a half. I was deployed up to the Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, Fort Meade, working for Army Cyber Command and the various agencies that are up there. And because I'm a Guard member, before you deploy, they want you to submit your resume so they know where to place you properly on the teams where you may have a proclivity. Anyway, I got up there, and one of the commanders came to me and said, "Chief, I'm a warrant officer, so that's how I'm referred to. I see you work for a software development company." And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." He said, "Good, you're running software development now." So for the last year and a half, 2 years, I had to develop this DevSecOps, and it may sound strange coming from the military because you don't really think of the military industrial complex or any of that mechanism as being very agile. And I was surprised what I found. Can't go into all the details. I can tell you that the Air Force is probably leading the fight there, right? They have this platform called Platform One, and the F-35 is our newest fighter jet, shiny model. Their entire F-35 simulation and training for all the pilots runs on top of Kubernetes, and they release code, secure code at that, 3 to 4 times a day. And I thought, then I got to spend a lot of time with that team, and got to not the entire team, but the people that are leading it. And I will, William, I'll share the guy's information on LinkedIn, because I know we're connected on LinkedIn. But he has a Ask Me Anything monthly meeting that he opens to the public. It's pretty tremendous. So good time. So let's just jump right into it. So what is DevSecOps, and why are we talking about it? Before we get into the definition, I had to solve this pretty quickly. I supported about 70 teams on my little field trip up north. 70 dev teams and operation teams. And then here at HealthStream, we have about 25 or so development teams. We release code every week, but we have the capabilities of releasing it every day. And so we want to release it whenever we want. We want to release it faster, right? So that's kind of the background in the environment that I've been operating in for the last few years. So in short, it's development, security, and operations. Putting security inside of the operations. And my goal is to kind of share kind of how we're doing it at HealthStream a little bit in the journey we've taken, and it's working out really well so far. The idea is to make everybody accountable for security. So it's not security's sole responsibility to secure everything, right? You just can't scale that way. We have a small elite team, I like to say, and we've turned ourselves in more of a consulting organization for HealthStream, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. But it's allowing and empowering your teams to implement those security decisions at their level and at the same scale and speed as operations, right? So I don't know how many of us on the call are solely responsible for security versus it's kind of part of our job, or I'm in development, I want to learn more about it. But if you're a security guy, taking this and allowing developers or operations people to make security decisions on behalf of the organization sounds scary at first. And we'll talk about how do you implement that, all right? All right, so DevSecOps, kind of think of security as code, right? You have to implement that kind of mindset. We have all these, infrastructure as code and platform as code, and we're working on compliance as code, but that's really what DevSecOps is. It's security as code. You have to work between the engineers and the security teams, and the job there is to get focused on empowering those teams to release secure code, right? Tonight, we're talking about application security and in the context of how that works. But you could take this same process and apply it to infrastructure code, which we did. So, if you think of infrastructure as code, utilizing Terraform or ARM templates or whatever you're looking at, Ansible, we take the same kind of concept and we apply it to our infrastructure team because they're part of this model. That's the ops portion of it. All right. And like I said, purpose and intent DevOps, everyone has to be responsible for security. So one of the things I did when I got back, and we've been working on this, is I set my team down and I said, hey, we have a challenge here with training our developers, right? So we're going to talk about some tools in a little while, but we spent a lot of resources on purchasing this development training platform. I'm not going to mention which one it is, but there's a lot of good ones out there, right? I happen to be a personal fan of Secure Code Warrior. And if you're not familiar with that, it's kind of a gamified version to help train developers on how to build secure code and kind of plugs into their workflow. But we weren't getting the activity that we wanted. And my feedback, so my feedback to my application architect was, well, what have we done? And I was getting caught up from being gone. So we sent them the links and we've registered them and we've had coaching sessions. We have this concept of guilds, development guilds. So we've been invited to their guilds, and we did a lot of good things and a lot of right things. And what we found is we still weren't getting the presence from the development teams that we wanted. So I sat with my team and I said, hey, what do you think about teaching them how to hack? And my team, of course, lost their mind. They thought I had lost my mind. They said, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. That's dangerous, yada, yada. Gave me a million reasons to do it. And I'm going to share with you what we ended up doing that. And I'll share with you some of the early results, right? So, but the whole concept is everyone is responsible for security, right? And that it's a little bit diametrically opposed of kind of how security is modeled today. So if you think of your traditional security, you're almost a shared service, but in some organizations that I've consulted in and been part of, everything has to go through security and get approved by security. And that whole notion opposes, just by virtue, you're developing a system being security. If you do that, opposes the concept of DevOps and moving fast and agile, right? So when we say it's everyone's responsibility, we still have to put guardrails in as a security organization to help them, meaning the developers and the engineers, to help them move fast, but move fast safely, right? And that's the kind of mindset you have to develop, right? So, and it takes everybody. It can't be the security coming in and saying, "Hey, we want you guys responsible for security." Because if you take that approach, what your developers are going to hear is, "Now I've got another thing I have to do," right? So, you know, I sit on the now it's called the CISO Executive Committee or the CISO Executive Council, whatever it is. So it's basically a group of us that head up security for different organizations. There's about 40 of us inside of the Nashville area. 40 of us that regularly meet. There's a larger community. And I listened to some of my peers, and the concept of allowing people to do this on their own is a little foreign to them. So, you know, some companies will take the approach that I'm the only one, security is responsible and accountable for everything, so I have to approve everything. But that same person saying, we want to move faster. So those two comments are just kind of opposed to each other. So keeping in mind that when you're from a security perspective, you're saying I have to enable that team to move faster safely. Now, how do you do that, right? Why DevSecOps is the next question too. So, and I just thought that zombie apocalypse was so appropriate. I just had to throw it in there given the times. This is a quote from Gartner. That's 2019. 80% of malicious attacks happen at the application layer. So the Verizon breach report just came out, and if you're not familiar with that report, that basically it is a library of information, especially as you're planning forward on what happened the previous year, right? And lots of good data in there. I suggest and encourage you to go take a look at it and read it and get up to speed on some of the threats. 80% of malicious attacks happen at the application layer. So how do you prevent that, right? How do you get good code developed and get it deployed out to systems, whether it's QA testing, dev, production? How do you do that safely, right? Because the faster you go in DevOps, the more opportunity you have for mistakes. So why is this so hard, right? So this came from Gartner as well. As we talked about, security as code has to be the culture, right? The hardest thing, let me stop here. The hardest thing that you're going to experience is kind of getting that culture. I want to take a pause. Bill, do we have any questions? Real quick.
Nope, I don't see any in the chat.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so security culture, that is the number one thing that you're going to have to overcome, right? The cultural aspect of it. And it's twofold. So if you come from a security perspective, if you come and apply a threat modeling type of scenario to your developers. If you're not familiar with what threat modeling is, Microsoft has a great one. It's called Stride. We kind of model it a little bit. It's basically modeling out where I can get in trouble at a high level for my application. You know, what opportunities do the bad guys have, right? And so I was actually in conversation with one of my associate CISOs at another very large company. And he said, we've tried to implement threat modeling into the development organization and they're not getting it. And I said, of course they're not, right? Because it's another thing they have to do, right? And so if you have a development team and they've got a deadline and they're trying to get code out, now they've got to stop. And even though you've empowered them to do the threat model, which is a good first step, they still see you security as a roadblock. And it's not very efficient that way. So 36% of developers rank protecting applications from cyber attack and data breaches as their top concern. That's good. That's up actually. 52% say testing delays development and threatens deadlines. Wow. And then 24% development team has no authority over application security. So how do you impact those numbers, right? So how do you get your developer teams thinking that part of their job is protecting against cyber attack and it's not just security's job, right? And then how do you get them testing in a way that they don't feel it delays, right? And then how do you empower them? And that's the biggest one. They have no authority over application security, right? So how do you empower those teams? What we found at HealthStream is you have to start with figuring out who that 36% is, right? Who are those people that you can go to that really believe that part of their job during app dev is protecting the data? That's where you have to start, right? Because then you have a conversation with them, and it can't be, I need you to be responsible for application security on your team. It's more, hey, help me figure some things out. How would you protect your data? It's conversation level, right? And that's really the collaboration that has to happen. The other part of this, when you talk about culture and security as code, is security, right? So that's often overlooked when I see these type of presentations, because everybody's talking about DevSecOps and enabling it, but security is part of the culture problem too, because for a long time, security was in the business of 1-800-NO, right? As a organization in IT in general, we're pretty young, right? Now the last 10 years have changed the conversation, of course, but security is not as mature as some of the other areas in information technology overall. So we've had the notion of, my job is the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the organization's data and assets, and I'm going to shut stuff down. And that has to change at the security level, okay? Application security testing, delaying development. So here's what you have to do up front for that, right? We're going to talk about automation, and we'll talk about some tools in a little bit, but you can't go into a testing scenario and add time. So when we were doing some testing, one of our scans was taking 16 hours. Now that's too long in an agile environment, right? So you can't add time. So we did some things to change that. If you're not familiar with what CI/CD is, we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. When I was up on my vacation, as I like to call it, up north, we took a process that was taking 8 weeks. And this is not just Jeff, right? So I had a great team. Being deployed with National Guardsmen meant I had people from all walks of life. My development team was made up of developers from Microsoft, Akamai, Booz Allen. So I had Amazon, sorry, Phil, but that's who they were. They were all over place and high-level developers. So we had a great team. We took something from 8 weeks, and that would take 8 weeks to get through all the security checks and get through all the code reviews and do the development. And we got that down, believe it or not, to 15 minutes. And that seems incredible, but it was a lot of work. But I would say that we did things that other people were doing successfully, and the things that people were not doing successfully that were looking hard, we didn't do. And it's just work. We looked for solutions, not problems, and that was the attitude we took. We'll talk a little bit more about testing tools and how you can overcome that. And then we enabled the development teams to make some decisions. We're going to talk about security champions. We created that at HealthStream, and I love that program. Just, Bill, can you poll the audience to see anybody has heard of security champions? Because I can't see anything on the Teams environment.
Okay, yeah, want to comment if they're out there? Why don't you comment on the chat? That way I can, we can relay the chat to them.
Yeah, I'm not
There-
able
there-
to.
There is a polling capability, I think, but I'm not sure. Let's see what we got here. Oh, wait a minute.
I got some.
Okay, here's a question from Scott. Of the 52%, do the responders see? Okay, second. Excuse me. Of the 52%, do the responders see other types of testing, performance, UX, etc., as a delay?
Yeah, yes, but probably not as much as security. I've noticed because, especially depending on how early you are in a life cycle, and I see, UX performance. They see it as a delay, but not as much because they're more accustomed to it. Is my opinion. I don't have any empirical data to say that, but most development shops do testing of some sort. And they're more accustomed to some type of performance or UX testing or something like that, smoke testing. But they see it as a delay, but not as big as a security delay, because quite frankly, and we're trying to change this conversation at Hellstream, and we're having success. It's when security gets into those rooms, there's a big sigh. It's like, oh, now what do I got to do? Well, they're going to stop my project, right? Your second question: do they feel they have also have authority over performance or other aspects? Generally, I don't know all other organizations, but generally, I would say that they have authority over impacting the other aspects, if that makes sense. So when
the reason why I was asking that mainly is because and maybe you're going to cover this, is because I feel like sometimes security's engaged late. And so decisions have already been made or requirements are given later, and developers sometimes dig their heels in. They feel entrenched.
Yes. Yeah, no, you must have helped me put my presentation. You're right, man. But that's where the security champions came in, and I'm going to go over that. I didn't invent that. I did invent the way we do it.
Okay.
And here's the thing with that: security is always going to be late because you just don't have enough, right? And it's not as a mature process in the organization to get them to the table early, right? Now, what we did is we created those guardrails, as I call them. And if I back up, I didn't start with a dev team. So we have 25 development teams. They're run by architects, and they have multiple developers, business analysts. They're focused around DevOps, and they're all aligned to certain platforms, right? And I didn't start with them because that's kind of, think of that as a grassroots effort. I started with the application leadership, and I said, here's what I want to do. I want to make you guys completely in charge of security at the application level. So it was, and I had QA involved, our cloud ops leader. So Scott, sure, you said Aaron, Aaron's part of those conversations. Our VP of software engineering, or CTO. This is after my team told me they wouldn't quit if they allowed me to do this, because they thought I was nuts. But you start there and you get support from the top down, because then you scale, right? So instead of having I have an application security architect and an application security analyst, and I have 25 development teams and 350 developers. There's no way I can scale. So security is always going to be late to that conversation. And if you've been in security long enough, as you start to specialize, the purple unicorn syndrome starts to happen. So just finding security talent, people say it's tough, and it is. Finding application security talent is even tougher, right? And case in point, I have a couple job openings, posted it, got a bunch of, not enough, but I got resumes for my information security analyst, and I got 2 application security analyst resumes. and that's it. So it's something you have to identify inside. So everyone's kind of got to take the notion of, yeah, I am responsible for this. I had to go do my job on that level, right? And what we are giving them is guardrails to say, because we want to catch it early, right? So we made the same mistake of buying a bunch of tools and trying to plug tools into the system without empowering, without giving them authority, and without allowing them some kind of matrix to make a decision, if that makes sense, right? And we fixed that sense. Good questions. All right, any others? All right, I'll start from here. So here's what you look at. I want you, has everybody heard shift left? Has anybody not heard of that? And you can speak. I can't see the chat anymore. Okay, so if you haven't heard shift left, so shift left is the notion of pushing security as far to the left. In this case, you can see it, development. Security is usually out past operations. So I want to push that responsibility as far left as I can, right? I want to give that to the developers to be able to correct security at that level, if that makes sense. The further along you go to getting closer to production, then the more costly it is to fix that exploit. If I can find it in development, that's optimal. QA is worst case. But once I get past that and it's in operations and I'm operating, that exploit is there. And now you and the rest of the hacker community know about that exploit. And it's very, very difficult to fix it. Because what happens in reality, it's not that organizations don't know or don't care about application exploits, right? It becomes a backlog item, right? I mean, if you're in development, you live and die by your backlog sometimes. So you work what you can. So I have to add that back into the backlog now, where I would rather find it earlier. And if I can do that, then it's just less costly, right? Now, how do you find them? And we have different environments up here. So there's different tool sets that you can go and deploy out. We'll talk about the different types, not specific tools so much, but we can talk about different types. Let's see. All right, just poll the audience real quick, Bill. I'd like to understand if anybody in the group has deployed any kind of application security tooling, whether it's DAST, SAST, IAST, or if you're even familiar with it.
Okay, comment in the chat or just speak up.
Yeah, sure. Oh, hey, hi, this is Vijay, and I worked on this dynamic application security testing. I installed a couple of Fortify tools like WebInspect and maybe other tools as well. There's vulnerability scanning tools. That was maybe I was going through most of the vulnerability tools like Acquintix or app scans on other, but my experience with WebInspect was pretty much good. So I installed a couple of tools.
Okay, cool. And Scott, you said all the above.
Yeah, I've implemented mostly on the DAS side and SAST. RASP, we were early lookers at Previty and stuff. We haven't found a lot there. IAS, same reason, unless your org structured to like a mature product and you're going to have continual development, that's there. What I've tried to implement though is more kind of a advocacy for a standard tool that that's fit for purpose for app teams, because you have to support such a large Java, C#, Ruby, Node, whatever, and then focus on things like Defect Dojo or reporting platforms that can allow me to see patterns to align training.
Okay, cool.
So
Jeffrey,
that
we lost your screen. Your
Oh, did you?
presentation. Yeah.
because the tools approach it's hard to do if you don't have a good process and you still have to remember you got people that, mostly like you said, it's habit, finding training. Then you have built an army that doesn't report to you.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's talk about some of the tools. I just wanted to get a feel for the audience. We'll talk about a couple of these and kind of what they are. And I'm going to add one more. So we talk about SAST, DAST, IAST, and RAST. So static, dynamic, interactive, and runtime. Go through each of them and what they are. So SAST is kind of your automated white box app testing, right? That scans your code. So think of whether, we're Azure DevOps shop. So we're going to walk through at a high level of a visual for kind of the pipeline. So a developer checks in code. The tool can be automated. Most of the tools out there, whether it's Veracode, checkmarks, whatever, white box, have webhooks now, so they can just feed right into your team's channels, and that's what we do. Lots of good integrations. They're useful, in my opinion, for that low-hanging fruit. If you're familiar with what the OWASP top 10 is, if you're not, that's your kind of top 10 application security vulnerabilities that you would find. It comes in the form of SQL injections, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, those types of things. It does require some management when you do this, right? So don't think of SaaS of hey, I'm going to scan all my code and then I'll just catch it there when they commit it before it gets into production. It doesn't really work like that, one. And to Scott's point earlier, you have to have a process. So if you're just scanning code and you haven't agreed what to do when you find a bad thing, then that's just going to be a really expensive report, because some of these tools are not very cheap. So you have to agree on boundaries. And one thing we did throughout all these tools, whether we found it in the SAST, and we have all of these deployed, or IAST or DAST or wherever we found it, we agreed on parameters early on at the executive level of saying these things are going to fail your build. So you had to start there before you even go start implementing a tool, right? So you have to get agreement on what you're going to do about it. And then depending on how large your code set is, they can take a really big amount of time, especially if you're in an environment where you have to merge your code. If you know what code merging is, think of it as you may have 3 development teams working on different components and different aspects of the one platform, and they're working on their parts. Well, at some point that code has to merge together to make it an application. So I may scan it at the development team level, but that doesn't matter because I have to scan it when it merges again. Now, where do you do this? Like I said, we do it at our repos. We're now implementing and we're redoing it so we can get it in the IDE. Some tools, and if you're not familiar with IDE is, it's your development environment. We're a .NET shop, so we have Visual Studio. So some tools will plug right in to your IDEs and tell you when you're kind of doing some bad things, right? And then we make libraries available so that if the IDE, this tool says that's not a good way to code you're not parameterizing your SQL statements, as an example, which is kind of what causes SQL injection. Saying that's incorrect is the first part, but then we provide sample type code. Now we can't provide sample type code for everything, but we provide sample type code of what they could look at, and that seemed to help.
Do you guys
Yes.
tend to group linters and things where you have to have a build artifact together in SAST?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Good question. All right, DAST. This is kind of your black box, gray box type stuff. This is when it gets to production or QA or almost. Like what threats are the application presenting at runtime, right? You can combine SAST and DAST, and we do, to kind of try and weed out the false positives. And then sometimes, we have to do some manual. So just because a tool, so think of, what a DAST is is you'll be able to scan a web application. So, Acunetics, NetSparker, Burp Suite has some. OWASP Zap is a free tool. And there's some plugins that you can do on Azure DevOps, by the way, to run automated OWASP Zap scans of, doesn't catch everything, but it'll definitely catch the top 10. But this is at runtime, and you can combine the results to kind of weed out the false positives. And then sometimes you do have to do manual testing. So think of DAST as I'm running a scan on a running application that all the bad guys would see. We tend to try and also use tools. So I have a cyber threat team. We have an enterprise version of our tool, but they also have what we bought them consultant versions are called. It runs on their laptop, and they run these tools at random to do that, because the bad guys get access to these tools. And then we try to emulate any kind of third-party scripting that any kind of adversary would do. All right, IaaS. So this is one of my favorites. So this is combining SAST and DAS. You do have to place an agent on the app, scans it in real time. We integrate this inside of QA, but it also integrates into the IDE pretty well. So if you think of the developer developing in the IDE, they're in Visual Studio, they're doing code, we're giving them input when they're doing, and we started with, by the way, the OWASP top 10, because you can't, and some API security. So we said, here's the things we want to look at, and we kind of started there, because you can't do everything when you start this. That's another big mistake that we see people making, and I did make in the past, and we fixed it here at Hellstream. So we just started small and say, let's eliminate the easier stuff. And then as it moves through its development cycle, you would hit it in QA, and you'd be able to check the code while it's in the developers in their IDE. You'd be able to check the code while they put it in their repo, and then you can run a DAS type scan against the QA environment.
Do you find that, like in Azure with serverless environments or serverless coding, that's used at all, or?
It's used differently, and I'll talk about that, right? So there are some other tools. What are you describing as serverless? Because I'm thinking functions. Azure
Me
functions.
too. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah.
So these don't work well for that, right? So I will say that think of Kubernetes, Docker. There are some Docker when you think of like CI/CD. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a Kubernetes release, basically. It creates those kind of pipelines for you. But the tooling that I'm talking about here is not as mature for those types of environments. I can't go and Google Azure Functions Scanner. You won't find it. You'll find the end of the internet. You got to catch that a little bit beforehand, but you can still do some of it. The DAS can still run it, but they don't work. The tool integration isn't there yet. Right?
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And now there are some good. There are some good companies out there that's working on it. Deep Fence is one that we work with that's just focused on Kubernetes, because Kubernetes, whether it's in Azure or on-prem, presents a different type of challenge. And I said earlier, we went from 8 weeks to 15 minutes, and I did that. And this is coming from the infrastructure. I spent 20 years building servers and data centers and clouds. I got rid of all of our servers. That's how we went from, because it was taking so long to do everything else. So I said, let's just go serverless and use functions and use Kubernetes where we can, and Docker. And so that's how you do that, right? This doesn't change because that's just your hosting platform. All right, so sometimes you can't fix the code, right? You just, whether it's a legacy application or it could be a particular version of .NET. It could be you're running some other third-party thing, which we're going to talk about, that can't be upgraded, right? So this is where RAFS kind of comes in a little bit. Not really a testing tool, right? And it's not a firewall. I think that web application firewalls have come a long way, but they're not the end all be all. They can't because you're still presenting a problem to the internet, right? So RASP works inside the application. It's more like think of whitelisting for your application. What could possibly be a problem with this though? For my developers that are on the call.
User acceptance.
Yeah, that's one of them, right?
Nobody wants to turn it in block mode. More than happy to
That's
turn
it.
it in listen mode, but
That is
block
it.
mode, nope. I don't want to lose that one customer that's going to type in something in a string that has
just in case.
HTML format in it.
So no one really wants to block, right? And what we find is that if you think about developers, I don't know how many developers just sit down, open up Visual Studio, and go to town writing raw code, right? The reality is we integrate things. And we integrate it through the IDEs and we create releases in their packages. But there's a lot of third-party software inside of some applications, and we have that. It's not just the user. That was the number one that we got feedback from is what is the user experience. I said it's no worse than the hacker is going to give them. So we're going to do this. And the other thing is, as the longer an application's been alive, the less likely you are to know exactly how it's made up of. Does that make sense? Well, hopefully it does, because you can inherit an application that's 10 million lines of code. And how do you figure out every component? That's where another technology comes in. And I didn't put it on here, but I want to talk about it. It's called SCA. Scott, you seem like you've been developing more. Have you heard of SCA?
I haven't heard of SCA, but I've certainly heard of like Sneak and other ones that do like a bill of materials type
That's
thing.
exactly, yep, that's exactly it. So
Okay.
SCA is like software component analysis.
Yep.
Right? What is my third party? What is my open source? Sonar-type, Black Duck, there's a bunch of them out there, but you'd be surprised at how much third party, because think about it, when you're trying to, if you're a developer, and I did this and I didn't even know it was common. It's just like I had to write code. And I was like, I don't know how to write code. So what does everybody else do? Google. And I find a snippet of code and I make it clean as much as I can. And it's a third party app inside my code. Now it's open source. That's where SCA comes in, right? Is really understanding what components are in there. Now, some of your DAS tools, by the way, will give you that readout. You'll learn a little bit about your application because some DAS tools, if you just run it from the outside, will say, here's your vulnerabilities. And let's say they find a SQL injection. They'll give you the components that make that up, because there's a concept known about that's in security. It's called vulnerability chaining, right? So I may, and that's where those false positives kind of sort of come into play. I may not have a SQL injection with this one unparameterized SQL query as it sits, but when I combine it with this other PHP type of in plugin that's in there, together they do give me that SQL injection. And some good DAS tools will give you that view, and they'll also tell you what kind of versions and libraries you're having. But to really understand it, you need a SCA tool. Questions so far? Any other questions, comments? If I'm going too fast, let me know. All right. So, being this is Azure, I wanted to map this out a little bit. Actually, GitHub and GitLab are now Azure anyway. So source code management in Azure is Azure repos. CI/CD, love Azure pipelines and test plans. Those are good. You have Azure Artifacts for your artifact repository. Kubernetes servers, AKS is that is a really nice platform. If you have not had a chance to check that out, it's a very, very nice platform. It's very easy to use. It's developer friendly. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes, you need to get familiar with Kubernetes. Because not just because all of the cloud providers are running it, but VMware, which is the virtualization software that's in a lot of organizations, their new product that they're coming out with is called Tanzu, and their VMware 7, it was called Project Pacific, but their backplane has changed now to Kubernetes. So VMware has gotten in the end, they said, hey, this is the new way. And I got an early look at it, and it's pretty slick. It allows a developer at the developer level to create, whether it's through Vagrant or Chocolatey scripts or things like that, to create Kubernetes workloads. But it also allows your traditional administrator to interface with a familiar VMware environment. So it's very good. Azure Firewall. That Azure Firewall, if you're not familiar with it, is not what I would consider an application security firewall. Right? It's a good firewall, but there are others out there that you can look at. It's a good service, but mod security, you can actually deploy mod security. That's an open source one if you don't have anything inside of Azure. If you're not familiar with the security solutions that Azure has, they've done a really, really, really good job at this, right? Their Azure Information Protection, and if you're a Microsoft shop and you are in enterprise agreement, I'm not selling anything. I don't get anything from it, but I just think the integration and the thought process that they've got in place for what they've produced is really good. I'm a big fan of Azure Sentinel. That's their SIM. So we plug into that. They have done a good job on the security front. All right, next we're going to talk a little bit about how do you automate this in DevOps, right? So take a look at a generic pipeline. You got your development environment, source code repository, build platform, that's your CI, your deployment process, that's your CD. So if you and I tried to break this down so that if you're not familiar with CI/CD, you can be familiar with some of these concepts. And your staging and production and hosting environment. Now, you may not have all of these environments in your pipeline, right? Meaning you might not have a UAT in yours, the way it's set up. But this is generally a pipeline that you integrate with. Now, you want, as I said, as much as possible, get in as early at this process as possible. Oh, wait a minute. As early as this process possible, right? So if you kind of look at this whole process, developer will create the code and check it in. Change is committed, build is executed, and that build platform, that's automated. We don't build any more infrastructure. So you can have that completely automated through the whole process. The deal is you have to automate the entire thing, right? When you're looking at security automation, you can't just automate parts of this because eventually you're going to have a stopping point, right? Now, there may be things where you want a developer, a more senior developer or an architect to take a look and do the code reviews. But once it's checked in and committed, then you need to automate this end to end. That's the secret sauce, right? You want to try and find it at the commit if you can. If you're not integrated with the ID, once they commit it, and what a commit is, if you think of Git, I do a Git push, I commit my code, and then my code is in there, and it starts a process, a security automation process that scans that code. During the build process, once I create the build, another package is run. I have test scripts. The test is not just security test. It's like your UAT testing, your QA testing, your general smoke testing. And then we have a pre-deploy stage where we do a final kind of sanity check before it's sent out the door. Questions on this high level? All right, so let's talk about the culture aspect. This is the hardest part, right? So, and it really, really is. We're going to start talking about security champions a little bit because I'm a big fan of what this is doing for us. People tend to think that automation will solve a lot of this. If we just build automated solutions to secure our code and check our code, that it'll fix this, and it won't. I will say that you can't do this without automation, but you can't do it solely on automation, if that makes sense. You have to have buy-in from your entire team. Security cannot be the only ones thinking about security. if you are ever going to run security and you find yourself in a situation where you're the only one thinking about security, then I would be nervous, right? Because you want the entire organization ideally thinking about security. So you have to build allies, right? And that's where security champions concept comes in. And instead of focusing on excluding people, we bring them in and collaborate. And the one thing we don't allow is the blame game. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for security. I have a board meeting coming up, audit committee, coming up, and I have to go talk to them. But I don't blame anyone, for maybe a developer left a database open to the internet, as an example. That hasn't happened, but I don't walk into our incident response team, which is comprised of our executives, and say that. It's just not happening. Because once you blame them once, then they're going to expect it. So at all costs, avoid the blame game. Excuse me. So what is security champions? All right. So we have two aspects of it. And there is the technical security champions. I'm going to stop there. Can you guys still see my screen? I'm going to take the silence as a yes.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah,
it.
we still see it.
So there's your technical security champions, and for us now, traditionally, security champion is someone that you have nominated and asked to be matrix and part of the security team. I have 15 younglings. If you're a Star Wars fan, the youngling is the lowest level of a Jedi Knight in the Jedi Knight training. We do want them to become Jedi Knights, but they've started their security training with us, and they come. So we have like 5 what we call solutions lanes, which make up different product sets, and I have developers representing all of them. And then I went to our corporate MIS, our corporate IT support, and our traditional data center infrastructure database group. And I said, I would love for you guys to participate. And, I actually have 18 now. So I have 4 more coming from those 2 groups. And what does that look like? So it's not awareness training, right? It is, we do make them aware, but we do it in a way that we're training them security. So we took a fun approach to it. And this is where my team, I said earlier, they thought I was crazy. I said, I want to teach them how to hack. And by teaching them how to hack, and we did a 12-week cycle, and we taught them like I said earlier, I have a red team that operates in my organization, and they came together with an application security architect, and they taught their first groups how to hack. And we taught them everything from initial planning, reconnaissance, enumeration, how to set up what's called C2, command and control infrastructure, how to avoid our security tools. We taught them everything. How to cover your tracks, which I got a lot of pushback. They didn't want that. I said, we got to teach them everything. And the goal was to make it fun, because no one wants to go to a security awareness training or learn how to secure code. But I said, hey, who wants to learn how to become Neo out of the Matrix? And I got a lot of people wanting to do that. So we made it fun. And it's helped to bridge the gap between us and the dev teams, right? Because at the end of it, and by the way, we didn't start with everybody. So I don't know how large some organizations are. I just went, I sold this idea. The execs loved it. My peers loved it. So I said, just give me 2 teams that you think would do this right away. And that's what we started with. Because if you try to boil the ocean, then you're going to have difficulty. But we started with 2 teams, and we did a groundswell. And it did help to bridge that gap. And at the end of the training for those 2 teams, what we turned around and did, and this was my favorite part, is that we got feedback. And by the way, when we said it had fun, we got them T-shirts, we got challenge coins made. We made it a big deal, right? So there is some, conversations you have to have from a budgetary perspective. They participate in what we call our Champions Corner on our security portal. So we just made it a big deal. And at that proof of value, as I called it, we turned to them and said, okay, you've learned these skills. Now come back to us in 2 weeks and tell us how you would hack your application. And those people came and they told us stuff we had no idea was in the application. We got a list of stuff that was backlogged. We got a list of stuff taken off backlogs because they said this won't work. Not after what I learned. Fabulous. Now we're on to phase 2. We're teaching all the teams. And that first few groups we're starting an internal bug bounty program. So if you're not familiar with what a bug bounty program is, it's just that you pay money for external entities. HackerOne is a big kind of crowdsource type of bug bounty program. They do that, and you pay those entities to find bugs, right? Some companies out there, by the way, that's their whole job. 5 or 6 people are in a room and they formed a little LLC, and some of those bounties I know can get pretty high. I know of an individual that got $250,000 from Google. So some of those can get pretty high. We don't pay $250,000, but we did an internal one, and we're testing that now. Working pretty well. We're starting our second one. I think it starts in August. Yeah. So at the end of the second one, second 12 weeks, where we're teaching more of the teams, we're going to have a CTF, and it's kind of a capture the flag. So we're building out that range now, and we're going to have the teams compete with each other. We got some people that are sponsoring, and we're going to have like an online CTF, and our executives are going to be part of it. So it's pretty cool. All right. And it's been well received. That's an example of bridging that gap and making security fun. And now we have these development teams. We have some proponents on our side. Another thing I did, I know there's some business people that are on the line. Another thing I did at the business level is I said, hey, we have 5 kind of product areas. We call them solution lanes. Inside of those solutions lanes, we have solution lanes leaders. And think of them as program/product managers. So every solution lane has a vice president, general manager on a business perspective. And they are responsible for all product release. They're responsible for client stat. They're responsible for full P&L. So if you conceptually take a look at what HealthStream calls a solution lane, that VPGM is the CEO of their world, if that makes sense. And the solution lane leader is a technical business person, almost like a mini CISO or a mini CIO. So I went to them and I proposed that, hey, you become part of the champions team and you're the business CISO, right? So they're now, because they're already having these technical conversations with their counterparts, with their VPGM. And so they are now, and I'm training them at a different level. So I'm training them on risk and other things of kill chain and what security means to the organization. So I'm training them at my conversation level a little bit. But now we've got them responsible and having part of the conversation. And that's working out well, just to have the conversation and create awareness. Because you can't sit back behind a keyboard and do it like that. So you have to go out and give them. Now they are empowered. I will tell you this: we've given those solution lane leaders guardrails, and we've said, here's your security champions inside your development teams, and we have said, here is the set of criteria, and it's different for every company, that you need to get a greater audience around before you make a decision. But if it's this stuff, then you can make that decision to move to production, because security is probably going to make the same decision you do, and you can make that decision to move to production. You have to put it in your backlog and let us, and that's working so far. So the idea of empowerment, somebody asked her, I think it was Scott, do they feel empowered? That's the way you do that, right? That's the way you empower that team. Questions on that? If you don't have a security champion program and you're serious about app dev, I wouldn't have said this a year ago, but doing it here at HealthStream and where I was at before up north, I don't know why it's doing that. It's transitioning like that. I'm a big fan of it. All right. So some lessons learned, and then we'll go to this will be my last slide. I don't know if you're tracking that bill, but then we can do a full Q&A. It's people, process, technology. If you've been in IT for 30 seconds, you've heard that term. So I've tried to break it down in those areas. So you have to build relationships. You can't isolate. You cannot do it. So you have to build those relationships ahead of time, and put yourself in their perspective. You know, what I'm asking, and it's just a conversation. Hey, is it going to be hard to do this for you? If I'm asking you to do threat modeling, is that hard? And the answer is, I've gotten so far as yes. I thought it would be. So here's what I'm trying to accomplish. What could you do? Instead of going and saying, I need you to threat model your application before it goes to production, that's different than, because that is my desire. That's different than, hey, can you do this? No, you can't. Well, what part of this could you do for us and with us? That just a different conversation and building a relationship. And hey, I understand that you have deadlines to meet as well. You have to empower them to deliver security instead of blocking it. So I took my team and I made them into an internal consulting team. And what I mean by that is, instead of having us do all the code reviews, instead of having us do all the architecture reviews, we spent 3 months developing standards, what we call guardrails. Here's the standards in the guardrails. If you are operating within this parameters, feel free to move as fast as you can. I said earlier about failing builds. Before we deliver that, I also got agreement that if we see anything operating outside of these parameters, we're going to fail your builds. You can come back in 5 minutes. You don't have to wait 5 hours or 5 months, but we're going to fail those builds and we'll help you fix it. So that's kind of the process we've done, right? We also, we talked about tools. One of the reasons we selected the tool that we did from DAST is because of the reporting capability. If you're in a larger development shop and that's what your focus is, we have the ability to group platforms like web applications by those solutions lanes. And basically, I'm able to give a report to the executive team and those VPs kind of every quarter of, here is the health of your platform. And that, you know, having that conversation with those business leaders is vital, and just having that visibility. So there are some good, that's another area to do when you're thinking about DAS, is what kind of reporting. Involve security from the get-go. Somebody said that earlier, and I said, never going to happen. And then here I am saying, involve me from the get-go. Security is not just us now. So security is part of that team. Those developers that we've trained up, they're security for that team. They're involved early, and we've given them parameters to come talk to us about it. Here's a big one: fix by priority, not everything. You may have a lot of issues with code, but like, what's the priority, right? So you can't fix everything. So it's taking a risk-based approach to things, just like you do patching. We take a risk-based approach to patching. We're going to patch everything we can on the outside, and then come inside and do the rest of it. Automate. Security controls should be automated and programmable, right? We have a repo where developers can post and introduce new tools for us. So we have with this security automation is the new kind of buzzword, and there are some good solutions out there. I'm a big fan of just Ansible, Terraform. You can do a lot with an ARM template nowadays. There's nothing really you can't do with ARM templates. So we automate and we deliver together. So my SOAR team will give the team some solutions. And sometimes what that looks like is the development team says, I'm gonna have this security problem. I need some help automating it. And so we take that on in our backlog. Or they say, hey, I had this security problem. I fixed it. Here's the tool in case another team needs it. And that's that feedback process that has to be there, right? You have to have an exception to policy process, right? Because not everything's black and white. So you have to have some kind of process where you guys can come together, and we've done it from a kind of a risk matrix, like what's the risk to the organization? And that's going to be different for every company. but that process has to be there so that when the interaction's there, what's the governance to say we have to shut this down or fix this or allow something to go in, or I can't fix this, then they get us involved for what's called compensating controls. That's where that idea of RASP comes in. So I have some code that I can't really update because I'm using this old .NET version that it's dependent on to run my control. So how can you help me? Well, let security can fix that. That's where security needs to come in, because the security team has done their job. They've identified an issue. Now we come in and introduce a compensating control. It could be a web application firewall. It could be RASP. And sometimes that answer is, we're going to monitor and automate, and we can't fix it right now. There's nothing we can do to compensate the security issue. But if we see this, here's the attack vector and the surface, and if we see this activity, we're just going to shut this down, and you get agreement up front with that. Technology, make templates, right? So you've heard me talk about automation and scripting and all these tools. It shouldn't be to the format of if you look at like an Ansible script or an ARM template or a Terraform script, it shouldn't be so customized that you know which team built it, or because those become like artistry works, right? They're like Picasso paintings. So you want to templatize as much as you can. We took a big effort, and we agreed on our basic language was Terraform and Ansible. That's what we use. There's a lot of playbooks. There's very little you can do. We don't log in to the Azure portal. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There's very little you cannot do through Ansible or Terraform, right? Adopt security to DevOps. Don't flip the script on them. So made that mistake early. We worked with them to change that. So don't flip the script on them, meaning don't try to make them conform, because we're new. Security's coming in and introducing this, and that team may have been working together for 5 years, and they've got a flow, and all of a sudden you're going to introduce this new process and say, change your process so you can be secure. That's going to be chaotic, right? You'll get pushback for sure. So, we said, hey, what can you do? This is what we need. Help us fix it. And then the conversation starts, right? And then just be open to new tools. So the biggest thing I see in security teams, and I'm not saying it's everybody, is like this whole concept of I own security alone, and I'm not going to listen to what the developers give me feedback. I'm not going to listen to infrastructure teams because I've got it figured out. And that's just not reality, right? There's probably got better solutions. So you got to keep an eye out for those things. And if you implement this kind of model, this DevOps model, DevSecOps model, what you'll find is you probably have people in your organization that are pretty smart cookies. If they've been a developer a while, they're pretty sharp. So you want to be able to plug into that expertise in your organization as much as possible, right? So that's where I say keep an eye open for other ideas coming from other people. I think that's that kind of concludes this. I'm going to give it back to you for any questions.
Okay, why don't we just have an informal Q&A at this point?
Absolutely.
Any questions?
One question I would have on your org structure. One thing I've tried to find, right? When you're starting out, it's always important to get tests to find patterns. Does your organization have a separate risk structure that you're able to separate yourself from the conversation of risk acceptance, and you can help people perform tests and secure applications without having that risk acceptance conversation when maybe a product team is at a minimum viable product, maybe they're engaged too earlier, but somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, hey, these guys are doing something new, you should be involved with it.
Mm-hmm. So org structure, meaning, I understand your question, but I'm not sure how the org structure aligns to that. So Are you saying is risk not a problem for me to identify, or is that something we don't look at?
Meaning you're performing the test, right?
Mhm.
But you're also outlining, kind of the risk acceptance or what the test means in terms of a risk, right?
Gotcha.
As far as I'm concerned, if I'm running a vulnerability assessment, the tests are the test. You walk into a doctor's office, get the tests, know what the results are.
Mhm.
You don't have the conversation really about what the risk appetite is, right? To lower the test or change the tests.
Yeah, good question. No, I get it now. So when we are integrated, so that's not on the like my teams when they're working with the dev teams, they don't have to worry about that. We've already agreed on what the risk appetite is. We have an enterprise risk board. We have a
Okay.
GRC group. So those are the ones that we got agreements with up front. And that took some education, basically. I partnered with Matt Wilson in our team, and I really wish he could have been here because he and I did this together. I get the luxury of presenting, but I could not have done it without him.
Right.
You just can't. And he and I got agreement up front on what that looks like. And it's not a you said the results are the results, and they are, right? Like, so we said if the results are X, no matter what, we're not letting it through. And so we got the whole organization to agree to that, so that the technical teams and the people are doing it don't have to deal with, is this a risk? Is this a big enough risk? No, they would just refer, we said, we got agreement, this is what it is. And then sometimes, yeah, you have to have the discussion of, well, it doesn't fit into our box. That's the other 20%. So they know that that's an escalation process. And Matt and I go together to describe it, by the way.
Right.
It's I think that I don't want to miss highlighting that Matt and I go with that VP or we're talking to the business together.
Yeah.
So that's important. Now I also think and I don't have a hard cold, some people are very opinionated about this. I don't report into technology. I report to the president of the company. It's the CEO, the president, and me. And does that offer me the ability to have different discussions? Yes, it does. Because I spend time with the president of the company every few weeks, and I update him on some things. And then, sometimes they're all great, and sometimes it elicits a response from a business unit leader that I might not have gotten before. Meaning, now I've got their activity, and I addressed a concern I think a month ago with a group. It was nothing big, but that's the SVP of that group reached out to me and said, "Hey, Eddie said that you guys had this conversation about this, and I'd love for you to come represent to my team." Perfect, right? You don't want those risk things done at the developer level, meaning the critical, high, easy stuff should be already made a decision agreed upon, right? Now, where you'll fall down is if you haven't had that agreement or it hasn't been educated, then you can't just shut things down for the team. It's a good question, though. Good question.
I have another one, but I'll pause, and if anybody else has one. I asked too many of them.
No, those are good. I like it.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I have one. This is Vijay. And just like DevOps has complete product, maybe DevOps has all these reports, DevOps has all these pipelines. Similar on maybe that note, is Azure has all these security tools gathered somewhere together so that maybe someone maybe new to this environment, if you consider my example, I'm new to all this security process, and even I don't want to do that earlier, but my team wants me to do that because I'm from a maybe developer background, and Scott has already talked about the same thing, the same problem I was also facing. Implementing all these tools to my product, it was a kind of maybe an extra overhead for me. We don't have that security team, but maybe if someone new wanted to learn these tools, someone new wanted to implement these tools in a kind of team, what you guys will suggest, like maybe
Sure.
follow this path, or follow this kind of steps? What's your maybe inputs on that?
Yep. Good question. So I will, Bill, what I'll do is I'll send you a list of resources. So if you can share, you've got all the email. So I
Wait,
would,
could you also send us the deck and I'll post it up
oh
on
yes,
the
for
meetup
sure.
site.
You'll get a
Okay.
copy of this for sure. So the first place I point people to, kind of gotten that question before, is there's a place called Azure DevOps Labs, if you haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so start there if you're not familiar with DevOps or Azure DevOps and the tooling, and just get the concept. And then they have some security ones there too. So start there. And Microsoft does a pretty good job. There's Azure workshops. I've got them consolidated, so I'll send the deck and this to Bill because we utilize some of these workshops. And if you're not familiar with them, Microsoft publishes these 2 or 3 day workshops that focus on certain aspects of DevOps security, DevOps, and pipeline security. And there's other open source tools, but I'll send that out. Right? There's not much in the way of tooling that you would have to go outside of Azure for. Whether it's key man, they can manage your key secrets. They can monitor your stuff, and most of the tools, even that we're using that are not part of Microsoft or their marketplace, integrates with Azure DevOps, and so there's more integration there because Azure DevOps is used by a lot of people. The tool. I would say this, that if you are using Git, a lot of companies use Git. There's a tool called Git Leaks. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't. Yeah.
So Git Leaks does, what it does is it goes out and looks for keys or any kind of credentials in Git repos, whether they're on-prem, because you can do it on-prem, or whether they're out, in a public repo. That's the #1 way. So we talk about pipeline security. The pipeline security has to start with a developer, right? And if you're gonna check your code in, and you've got your key and the code in a public repo, or even if it's not public, the key and the code's in another repo.
Gotcha.
So we run that. My threat team runs that just to go hunting and looking, right?
Yeah, the one thing in Azure I haven't found that comes out of the box, and we often get Azure Secure, it's Microsoft, right? Are vulnerability assessment tools that aren't like patching type tools, where you're searching for like known bad, known good, right? And it's kind of a binary decision. It's still a hard decision to patch sometimes, but doing assessment type things.
So Security
those
Center?
Those are mainly like in the DAST part. But Security Center is good for some of those things. It's just missing that one.
Yeah, it's not there. It's not an inherent tool for Microsoft.
Right.
But if you can combine Security Center and Sentinel, and if you're got a good security team, you can paint a picture without a DAST. Now, OWASP ZAP, I referred to that earlier, and that'll be part of this workshop package that I give to Bill. They actually have a walkthrough that they built that you can, in OWASP ZAP you can plug in right from Azure DevOps and plug it in, and you'll have to enable it. White Source is another one that you can plug in. These are community editions that you have that are available in Azure. Again, you have to enable the plugin through your portal. But those are tools. Now they're limited. If you're a 300 developer shop, then they're not going to work for everything, right? But you can plug those tools right in, and they can do some scans for you, and you can get an idea. And that's where we started, right? To do DAST and IaaS, those tools on just that platform, those 4 tools and SCA, we spend 7 figures a year. These aren't, now can you do it open source and free? Yeah, they're out there. But we spend a lot of money on it. Now, you don't start that conversation of give me millions of dollars for app spec without having some kind of data, right? That's not, that's not the way it happens. So you have to collect data, right? And I'm lucky. I get to brag about all this good work, but I am very lucky. I mentioned that CISO executive team, the committee that I'm on. I'm very fortunate with the executive team I had, from my CEO, president of the company, legal. I mean, the entire executive team is so supportive of this. They do not view security as an afterthought at all. I can't say that for every company. Now, there are other great companies that see this, security is important. And there are some companies, boards that just see it as the insurance, right? That's in case there's a fire.
Right.
So I'm very fortunate in that. Good question.
How much standardization did you have to build into the SDLC processes of these groups to ensure that they're using the tools that you provide? Like, I came from an organization that had a number of different development groups, and the organization had a lot of tools, but a lot of the different groups used a different development lifecycle process, and we're kind of starting from the ground up when they do things like CI/CDs. So they didn't necessarily tie in the tools that we had, or they didn't necessarily build out something into a staging environment that might get scanned. How did you deal with differing development life cycles, and how much did you have to build out kind of like base templates for things like CI/CD to be able to onboard development teams?
So the development lifecycle, I'll address first, because that's actually a couple questions in there. So the development lifecycle, 90% of all of our dev teams were in line with what we do, right? We did identify that early on at the Matt Wilson VP and Aaron level. And I will say this breaks, we do a lot of development for what we call our traditional platform and our platform up in the cloud. So a lot of it was already there. Then what we didn't do once we discovered that 10% is we didn't go and force them to change, because that's disruptive, right? So if you think about what that would say to the dev team, one, I want you to develop in a different way, and two, as you do develop in a different way, I want you to add these tools. Of course, they're going to resist that, right? That's where I mentioned earlier, we sat down, and that was that 10%. We sat down and said, okay, what can you do? Tell me how you do it. Now, tell me, if I ask you to do this thing, is that going to be a drag? And the answer was yes. So we modified our process to them until they could get in line. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Right. Second part of your question was on usefulness of tools, if I recall.
It was kind of whether you had to template out and build things that people could onboard to.
A ton, right? A ton. So you have to start with this policies, like, okay, what's my API standards, right? What are they? And we had developers help us write that. So we didn't start back and say, here's my API standard. We went to the teams and said, hey, we need an API standard. How do you do it today? So we did our investigation. And then we did create templates. Not all teams using them now? No, not yet. They're getting there. But you have to start with the standard kind of when you build a house, you start with a blueprint, and that's what we started with. And then we started building templates. Our threat model is a YAML file now, because my architect, I love him. He's been with us for 12 years. And he was just like, they won't do threat modeling, and he's like, Jeff, what they got to do? I was like, I get it, but they won't. So how are we gonna fix that? And I said, let's just codify it for him. And he did that. He created a YAML file and said, here, run this YAML file. This YAML file now runs when they do a build and put it in their CI/CD process. So they're doing threat modeling without knowing it, and it spits out some information to them.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll ask them. I don't think there's anything proprietary. Bill, if it's good to everybody else, share the YAML file.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. Good question.
When you said you were having trouble getting security talent, right? Have you thought about hiring internally from development teams? Because one of the
Already did, yeah.
Okay, because one of the really big things is to give senior level developers that don't want to go into management or architecture an outlet.
Yeah, so
that's the road. That's the path I took.
100%. I agree 100%. But here's the problem with that, with my company in particular. We already gave them that outlet like years ago. So we have developers that are architect level, that are director titles, but they don't have any. They're functional. They're not people managers, because we identified that 5 years ago.
Yeah,
we got top talent that does not want to be managers, but there's a ceiling for them. So we
Right.
structure it that way. So you can go all the way up to like seriously a VP level and be an individual contributor in our company.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but to answer your question, that's the only way. I actually consulted with a friend of mine, and he's building this, and he's got like 12 head count. And I said, for these two positions, which is their application security architect and their cloud security kind of security architect in general, I was like, do whatever you do to find them inside, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because they know, right? I'm interviewing. I have an application security analyst position. Got some resumes we've identified, but I want that person to come from inside if I can, because they already know our application.
Right. Yeah. We started two different programs. One was called Security Coaches, and they were basically people that came from dev teams but reported into security, right? And they went out to help. They used their pre-existing, relationships and things like that to go help dev teams, but the reporting structure was different. I think, Matt McGrath, who is at PNC, that's where I came from, my lineage. He did a podcast with Chris Romeo. So if you look for like AppSec podcast, you can find some good content there on that. But the Security Champion one is a little different because the developers stay in the development role. They don't report in security. So
they don't report in. Now they do attend our meetings. So a security champion they are part of our communication workflow.
Mhm.
So I don't want it to seem like, hey, I went and trained these guys. They are part of our meetings. I have an offsite, a full day, virtual offsite. They're part of that. They get the same amount of training, the same exact training that my security team does. If I've got Black Hat resources, they go to Black Hat, not this year, of course, but they go to those SANS training. So they're part of it, but you're right. They're a developer.
Right.
They are a developer.
And you probably also align some HR goals to them too. Those are
Very
always like
much so.
start out at stretch goals, but work into more formal things.
They're quarterly goals. And I can tell you the hardest thing that I'm working on right now, I don't mind being transparent, is that VP, that solution lane VP, general manager kind of business leader. I want them, part of their bonus to be based on security defects.
Yeah.
Right. That scared them a little bit, but I mean, the idea, they like, well, I like that idea. I'm just not sure how to work. Because if you're going to be accountable, you're going to be accountable.
Right.
So I aligned mine with that. What company you said you're with? McGrath? No, wait, PNC.
I used to be at PNC. I'm at a manufacturer retailer now, but I'm kind of not in the Nashville area. I'm looking maybe to move there. So I'm kind of joining around different meetups because right now, hey, all the meetups are virtual. So it's really good to get different opinions, perspectives, things like that. So appreciate that you're able to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think it matters where you live. I was on a meetup in Belgium like 3 weeks ago. It's kind of cool.
Is that Matthias doing the secure code warrior thing?
Yeah.
Because he lives over there.
Yeah, sharp guy.
I met him at a BSIM when Gary McGraw from Sigil Synopsys was basically, Matthias was showing me secure code warrior early on. Gary comes up behind us and's like, that's really cool. So that's how I got my introduction. And one of the big introductions into AppSec is Gary McGraw coming in, telling the C-level at PNC, you need to hire more developers in security.
For sure.
So
yeah,
that's kind of
my team. Yeah, that's a good point. So my team on this conversation, my team is comprised of about 60% health streamers, as we call them, and developers. I would honestly say 30% of my team's developers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, because it's just that's the world we're going into now.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Bill, can I give somebody a plug?
Sure, go ahead.
All right.
Why not?
So you probably know this lady. Have you heard of Tanya Janka?
Oh yeah. Yep.
All right.
Yeah. Very purple team security.
She listen. If you are in a position in your organization to bring her in, I love her approach. So we spend a few hours. We wanted to get this right, and I said, listen, because I followed her up north and with the Platform One Air Force guys, and I went to my boss and the CTO. I was like, she's really good. And
Mhm.
whenever I had a question I had to answer to a 2-star, I would go see what she said about that question. Right. And she has a really good approach in the sense that, you know, some consulting organizations come in and they do a gap analysis and they give you this big pie chart and they say, you got to do all this work. And, you know, sometimes you just can't get to that, where she is. You mentioned coach, and that's why I bring her up, Scott, is because she's brought in a coaching mentality.
Mhm.
She meets with our AppSec team, you know, a couple hours a week. And
okay.
then she meets every 2 weeks. She's meeting with the greater, like my level, like the VP of engineering, the CTO, Aaron's on that, our VP of cloud, our
Yep.
QA leader. And she's telling us what we need to do to support the efforts that are going on at the grassroots. Love her approach, and she's not charging enough probably, but love
She's
her
not
approach.
right now.
Yeah, she will, now that she's, you know, this plug's gonna be
Yeah.
on YouTube.
She used to, she used to be part of Microsoft and then split
Yeah.
off on her own. So
Yes.
for Microsoft shops, really, I mean, he's kind of like Steve Smith, who's, you know, a developer advocate. He actually lives up in Cleveland area where I'm at. And yeah, there's some really, really good, especially now virtual things, you know, look out on like odd places like Twitch and Discord. You know, you'll find a
Yep.
lot of stuff out there that almost too much. That's the hard part, is trying to figure out what to start with.
True. Good question.
Yeah.
Any others? Bill, you good? I will send that information out to you either later this evening or first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot.
And actually, I think
Excellent.
Tanya is actually doing a AppSec talk in August, right, from the OWASP.
She is. Yep.
Thing. So if anybody's looking for that, those are relatively inexpensive. I think they're like $400 or $500 for training around those types of things.
Okay, any more questions?
Awesome.
If not, then we'll wrap it up. Don't forget to check the YouTube channel in a couple of, probably by the end of the weekend, I'll have it up there, the recording, so that you can listen to it again. And if you have suggestions about future meeting topics, let us know. As you can see, we've got meetings scheduled out through October, but we're always looking for new topics. Okay? And if that's it, we'll see you next month.
Right.
See you guys. Enjoyed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
Great.